Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the session this afternoon. FMA Internals Power Management. We'll talk a bit about the FMA Internals bit in just a few minutes. It's a sort of a small announcement that Mick and I would like to make. And power management, how did we pick this topic? Well, we spoke about this a few months ago and we thought it would be a good idea to, or a fun idea to pick a topic which, well, isn't that well known, perhaps that isn't that popular.
A little neglected,
yeah.
You could say at times, right?
Isn't that much discussed, and well, we thought maybe we can provide you with some new insights for the guys and girls, of course, who haven't worked with power management before, or a long time ago perhaps, well, provide you guys with an overview on how it works, how it needs to be configured, some of the things you need to know, you need to be aware of before implementing, and well, take it from there. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on with power management under the hood and, you know, with FMA, and definitely sometimes parts of it are overlooked. There's a lot of nuances as well, you know, because we're talking about different types of desktops, you know, private as opposed to shared, and so we're going to share some insights today.
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect.
The agenda for today.
Yeah, okay, I can run through the agenda really quickly.
Sure.
So that's the introduction pretty much done. We're going to talk really quickly about an initiative myself and Baz are starting called the FMA Internals Co-op. So we'll talk about that now in a few moments. I suppose we've already discussed power management and why, and obviously there are some people in the room today, so we obviously guess there was a little bit of an interest. We had visions of this room being completely empty today when we stood up at the top of the room, so thanks for joining and taking the time to be here. We're going to do a really quick architectural refresh in terms of FMA, because we want to have a look at the service which is really responsible for looking after all the power management. That will literally only take a couple of seconds. We're not going to bore you with too much deep architecture stuff. Baz is going to run through the overview, some default behaviors based on machine and desktop types and stuff like that. We're going to look at pool values, buffer levels. I'm going to run through just a small couple of advanced configurations through PowerShell, maybe to showcase a couple of features that you may or may not be aware of. So we'll just go over that for a few minutes as well. Baz again is going to talk about some of the stuff and what the people in the community are doing right now.
Of course,
to support power management. Yeah. And then we're going to have a real brief look about what's happening in the future. And that's pretty much it. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end.
Yes, hopefully. Well, for the people who don't know me, my name is Bas van Kaam, which is also my Twitter handle. So if we're unconnected, look me up and well, we'll take it from there. I'm a consultant and I work for a company called Detron, which is a Dutch company based in the Netherlands. And I've been in IT for about 15 years and have been doing consulting for the last 4 to 5 years. And most of my work, my projects were Microsoft related up to 2.5, 3 years ago, from where I started focusing on the Citrix portfolio more specific, and have been doing ever since. I'm also keeping an eye out on all the stuff that Microsoft's coming out with, VMware, Nutanix, and I will continue to do so, of course. Yeah, from the time that I started focusing on Citrix more specific, I also started my own blog website, basvankaam.com. You might know me from that. If not, go have a look. You might find something of interest over there. And that's basically me in a tiny nutshell. I don't want to spend too much time on this. So
no, it's perfect. Well, I'm not quite as famous as Baz. You know, there's not too many superstar bloggers out there, but Baz definitely is one of them. So basically, I suppose I've been in IT for a number of years, like I presume everybody else here. I've been with Citrix just about 11 years now, in various roles. Started as a humble frontline engineer, moved into escalation, and I've been with the readiness team, the team responsible for developing and creating training for the last 5 or 6 years. So that's pretty much me. I don't have my own, you may know me from Twitter, I'm the XC Tipster of course, but I don't have my own private blog space right now. So if you want to check out my blogs, you can see them at citrix.com/blogs, and that's pretty much me in a nutshell as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So really we just wanted to talk about the co-op really quickly. And this was born out of Baz reaching out to me some time ago. You know, we've met before at E2E Barcelona and various events and stuff like that. I'm well aware of Baz and what he's doing in the community, of course. And I think, Baz, you just reached out to me in terms of you were building some detailed blogging on a cheat sheet for FMA and various components and stuff like that. So Baz had some questions on the server VDA and the implementation. I was able to talk to our internal architects and engineering guys, and we had a bit of back and forth. And that's where the idea for the co-op was born. So going forward, you know, I'm obviously going to rely on Baz's experience with his blogging and visibility in the community and my internal knowledge. So really we have a guy on the inside, Baz, and we have a well-known celebrity on the outside. So going for, we want to do a lot of FMA stuff.
Yeah.
So that's where it's going to start.
For sure.
And then hopefully long term we'll move into other areas as well. So.
Yeah, and we also thought it would be fun to come up with some sort of a logo. So if you see this, keep an eye out for it, and then you'll sort of know what's coming up. Well, during the next few slides, I'd like to talk a bit about why we might want to implement power management, what some of the advantages might be. Also, some of the things you need to be aware about before implementing, because it doesn't fit all use cases, so to speak. And also, I'd like to start with a short, sort of a face-off between the two, between VDI versus RDSH, because there are some big differences between the two, specifically when you look at power management. As most of you might know, the capacity and power management features as we knew them within XenApp 6.5 or know them within XenApp 6.5 aren't here anymore today within 7.6. So, and the same applies to the reboot schedule we can apply to reboot our RDSH or XenApp service from time to time, which is for multiple reasons still important to do. And all we have now is a relatively simple reboot schedule available from the GUI within 7.6, which in most cases isn't sufficient. It might work for smaller companies, but you'll soon run out of some of the advanced stuff that you might need. We all know that when we need to reboot our XenApp service from time to time, multiple times per week even in some cases, this can be sort of a pain in the ass because you have to deal with multiple things actually. Users being logged on all the time constantly, so we need to be able to somehow put our machines in maintenance mode, drain them from users, but also constantly check if there are no more active sessions on there, and then reboot, see if they're back online, things like that. You also might have to deal with certain company policies like idle connect or idle policies, idle session policies, or disconnect policies, which can be quite extensive, which also complicates things even more. And of course, the lack of advanced functionality now with regards to rebooting our RDSH service within XenApp doesn't help either, of course. So that's why I put the phrase "community to the rescue," which is something I'd like to discuss a few slides further on within the presentation. Sort of a shout out to some of the community reboot scripts available today, which are free to use. So just so you know that, they're there, free to use, and they do the trick in most cases. So. Luckily, if you look at VDI desktop machines, we have a lot more options. It's more advanced, and some of the reasons why we might want to implement power management is, of course, to be able to manage our machines and tell them what to do basically during peak and off-peak hours, to guarantee enough capacity for the users logging in by pre-booting machines, for example, so the user experience will be fast, will be smooth. To manage log-off behavior as well, so that we can tell the VM what to do when the user logs off, but also when a session, for example, has been disconnected for 15 or 30 minutes, which is configurable, of course. And that way, for example, shutting down machines which aren't used, have no purpose anymore, to free up physical system resources for other VMs, eventually leading up to, green IT, efficient power use, can save you some money, especially within larger environments. There are some things you need to be aware of before implementing power management, because it doesn't work for everybody. You could say it only works for virtual. It doesn't work for physical machines. You'll have to deal with certain delivery group dependencies. Power management is configured on a delivery group level, which is something I'm going to discuss within a few slides from now. It also doesn't work for remote PC access, for example. It's VDI exclusively till now, as I've just mentioned, with regards to XenApp, RDSH. And also, if you go through the edocs pages, for example, and have a look at the SDKs available for XenApp and XenDesktop, you need to know that most of what's in it only applies to VDI, about 90-95% when it comes to power management. So that's something you need to be aware of as well, because it isn't always that clear. And of course, you need some PowerShell skills, some PowerShell knowledge to be able to make some advanced power management configurations, which isn't a bad thing per se. It makes the product or the feature more flexible, of course, but yeah, you need to be aware of that before implementing. So, let's have a look at the
Perfect, Baz. Thanks very much. So Baz is absolutely 100% right. You know, the power management functionality we have is mainly aimed at VDI, of course. Pooled and virtual, pooled and dedicated machines as such. The one thing that we've kind of discussed before is the remote PC angle. So we do have power management when it comes to Wake on LAN, which you guys would probably be aware of as well. So that was brought in a while ago. But it's not obviously exactly what we're speaking about today, but just to mention that really quickly. So again, this is probably very familiar to a lot of people. I think every presentation I've ever done, I've shown some form of this architecture. So we're looking at obviously the high-level FMA architecture here. This has been updated to 7.6. We can see the broker service sitting right there in the middle. I'm not sure if I have an animation. Oh, there we have. Lovely. So the broker service, so right there in the middle. So one of 11 siblings. Okay, so what pretty much is happening here, and I'm sure maybe many of you are pretty much aware, so this is one individual controller. We have 11 FMA services which are working together, communicating under the hood using WCF on port 80, all talking to each other. All stateless services, so no information is maintained locally, everything is stored in the database. That's pretty much what is happening here. And again, the broker service, as we move on really quickly, because I don't want to spend too much time, really, I just want to point out that the broker service is what we're really speaking about today. So, quite often I refer to the broker service as the workhorse of FMA. Not only is it looking after all the VDA management, the XML brokering, the licensing, the registration, the launch request, all that type of stuff. One of its big areas of focus, of course, is power management. So it looks after the complete power management actions and functionality. So just to give you some examples, and again, we're going to discuss some of these today. Baz is going to take you through some of these. I'm going to focus on a couple of the other ones. Pretty much everything from power time schemes, power policy rules, pool buffer size management for those, pooled machines, reboot cycles and schedules for our server operating systems, our RDS workloads, of course, we're going to talk about that. Even everything from PVD inventory updates fall under the power management functionality, MCS disk resets, of course, as well. Some of the unsung heroes and stuff which is not really spoken about very often, and something which is configured through the site access policy would be user-driven desktop restarts, for example. We won't focus so much on that today, but you can see, when we spoke about remote PC wake on LAN as well, you can see there's a lot going on with power management. And again, that's one of the reasons why we kind of wanted to speak about it today in a little bit of detail. So we know the broker service. So essentially, when you hear the term power management, just think of the broker service. That's pretty much the situation. So when the broker service has to perform a power action, essentially that power action is put into a queue, and the action itself is given a priority, a default priority, and based on a throttling mechanism, that action is sent to the hypervisor, and that's pretty much what is going on. You can configure that throttling mechanism through the UI, i.e. Citrix Studio or PowerShell. And really the idea here is that you can avoid overloading the hypervisor. It depends on the spec of your hypervisor. Some people will have higher spec hypervisor, some people have lesser spec, so you really have to find throttling settings that work for you and your customer or your organization. So Citrix pretty much, and we'll see in a minute, has provided quite conservative values in terms of power management, so it's up to people to kind of do testing themselves and find the baselines and see what actually performs quite well. In terms of viewing hosting power actions, very simple through PowerShell, and there's various commands associated with the get broker hosting power action, in terms of wanting to create power actions for the first time or edit existing power actions. But simply, if we just do a get broker hosting power action, we can see a couple of power actions which have entered the queue based on the throttling mechanism. They've been assigned priorities and the tasks have been completed. It's very straightforward. And what you'll notice here is the base priority and the actual priority. And if we compare the different priorities of a server OS, an RDS server, and a pooled desktop, for example, you can see the base priority is slightly different as well. So it's clear that the server-hosted desktops take priority over pooled desktops. So that's if they're entering the queue at the same time. So that gives you a bit of an insight just looking directly in through PowerShell. So moving on swiftly. So the thing about the throttling mechanism and the throttling values, they are defined at a per hypervisor connection level. So, if you're going to configure that through Citrix Studio, you just jump into obviously your console, you click on your hosting node on the left-hand side, you can find your hypervisor connection, you can click Edit Connection, and you can pretty much click on the Advanced tab, and we have our throttling values right there. Now at the same time, we talked about being able to configure that through PowerShell as well. Some of you may be aware that we have an XD Hype pseudo drive which is mounted as part of the hosting service PowerShell provider. So we can access the same information through PowerShell as well, which I'm sure, Carl, you know very well, of course. So this is quite interesting, and these values have changed over the years. If we go all the way back to Zen-Desktop 4, you know, the throttling values had to be configured in the configuration files of our .NET services on the controller. Since Zen-Desktop 5, of course, we had a UI options to configure all of this. So, you know, we pretty much have absolute and percentage values. So we essentially have simultaneous actions, all types, simultaneous personal Vitas inventory updates, and maximum new actions per minute values. So like I said, these are very conservative values, configured by, or you know, internally our Q&A people and our engineers came up with these values. You know, you might be able to push the boundaries a little bit more than this, but again, internal testing is required. If you define absolute and percentage values, only one is used, so the lower of both values is used, for example. So if you had, if a percentage, 20% of, I can't even give you an example here. Essentially, if you had 1,000 machines in your hypervisor was managing 1,000 machines, 20% of 1,000 machines is 200 machines, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
My mind is going crazy. I'm sorry, okay. So that would be 200 machines, 20% that we would have the throttling actions, simultaneous actions against. So in that situation, the absolute value would take precedence, okay? So you don't have to configure both values, but you know, you can if you want. By default, they are both configured. So that's how we do it through the UI. Again, you can do it through PowerShell as well. And that plays an important part, understanding the throttling mechanisms that they are there. And Baz will speak a little bit more about that later on, because certainly I think people can run into issues as well.
Yeah, sure. During the next few slides, I'd like to talk a bit about how and where to configure power management from a GUI perspective, and after that Mick will show some more advanced configurations using PowerShell, and also talk a bit about some of the terminology involved, because it kind of gets confusing sometimes. To start, power management is configured, as I mentioned, on a delivery group level, so you can have different power management schemes, if you will, per delivery group. And we basically have two types of delivery groups, which is a sort of basic Zen-Desktop terminology. You could say we have random and we have static, or pooled and assigned, or pre-assigned, or whatever you like to call it. But the basic idea is that when a user logs in with pooled, for example, he gets a machine assigned, he will log off, log in again, and the machine he gets assigned then can be a totally different machine, which is, well, pooled. And static, the machine will stay with the user, it will stick with the user, it will be permanently allocated. So those are the differences between the two, and a VM with regards to power management can be in 3 different states within one of those 2 types of delivery groups. They can be unallocated, which goes for all the machines, of course, when they start out. They can be randomly allocated, which is basically pooled, or they can be permanently allocated, which means static, so it will stick with the user. Now, based on the state that a VM is in, it can be partly managed or fully managed with regards to power management, which is something you need to keep in mind. And all you need to remember for now is that when a machine is statically assigned to a user, so it sticks with the user, so to speak, it's only partly manageable. And we'll have a look at some of the differences between partly and fully manageable with regards to power management during the next few slides. But also a few exceptions. If you have a VM with a PVD assigned, for example, it will start out unallocated as well. And once it gets assigned to a user, then it will be static as well because of the PVD and the changes on there. I know it's not used that much, but it can happen, and you need to know that with regards to power management, it will be partly manageable. The same applies to pooled desktops. You can pre-assign a pooled desktop or a random desktop, or whatever you like to call it, to a user, which also makes it static and thus partly manageable. So some things you need to be aware of. If we look at fully manageable machines, we basically have 3 main features which we can apply or use to power manage our machines, which are pools, buffers, and something called power state timers. Now, a pool is nothing more than a configurable amount of machines within a pool which are unallocated at first, but are pre-booted. So when a user logs in, the whole experience of getting a machine assigned will be fast because they're pre-booted. Now, a buffer is nothing more than sort of a subset of a main pool, which also holds a configurable amount of machines, but they're still in a shutdown state. And when the main pool runs out of machines in an unallocated pre-booted state, which is 10% by default. If only 10% of the machines in the main pool is left, then the machines in the buffer will get booted one by one to maintain that 10% of unallocated pre-booted machines. That's basically how it works. With power state timers, we can tell a VM what to do under certain conditions. For example, when, well, by default you see on the screenshot as well that it's set to, oh, sorry, yeah, it's not highlighted. If you look here, this section which says during peak hours, off peak hours, when disconnected, those are the power state timers. You can tell the VM what to do to shut down, suspend, reboot, or whatever. And of course, you can configure the amount of time in there, which can also be based on logoffs, for example, using PowerShell, which I'll talk about in just a few seconds.
And just to add, Baz, really quickly, because we've spoken about this as well, in terms of the buffer levels, you can set buffer levels for peak and off-peak hours, of course. And back in the olden days with ZenSF4, we didn't have this feature of the buffer levels. So when ZenSF5 came in, we referred to this as intelligent power management, because we only try and, we don't bring all the machines back up to make them available through the peak time of 8 and 9 in the morning, for example. We'll always only have 10% of the machines available for people to log in. So kind of intelligent power management.
Yeah, for sure. Once we have configured the pools, buffers, power state timers, and again, you don't have to configure them all, of course. You can pick whichever you like. But if you're done configuring, then those settings will apply based on the peak and off-peak hours that we configure, and the weekends and weekdays. Through the GUI or using PowerShell, using one or the other. And it kind of looks like this from a delivery group perspective. At the top, you configure your pools and buffers. The power state timers are, below there, like I just pointed out, and all those will be based or will be applied on the peak and off-peak hours, weekends and weekdays that we can configure. So with fully managed machines, of course, you have to enable configure something first, otherwise it won't work. And I already mentioned the 10% set on the buffer. So when the main pool runs out of machines, then the machines in the buffer will get booted. So at least 10% within the pool, the main pool will be in a pre-booted state. But you also have to know that random machines, so machines that are randomly allocated, that are pooled and with a PVD, will be shut down by default if a user logs off during peak hours, which is something you can configure or change using PowerShell. Also logoffs instead of disconnects, which applies to the power state timers. By default, they're set to disconnects. But you can change that using PowerShell, so you can manage the logoffs on the machines as well. And the same goes for the weekends and the weekdays. An important point you need to know is that power management precedes Citrix policies, or Citrix policies, studio policies, which means that if you have a disconnect policy for, let's say, 30 minutes, if you set it to 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, and you set power state timers to, let's say, 15 minutes, then those will apply. Those will overrule the studio policy. So, with partly managed machines, you basically have a lot less. It's a lot less granular. You don't have any buffers, power state timers. You don't have real pools either, because during peak and off-peak hours, machines will be booted, but only 10% by default, which is something you can change using PowerShell again. And that also is then the pool you can configure using PowerShell. So that's why I mentioned no pools either, because you don't have any real option through the GUI. You have to adjust this using PowerShell. So default is 10%, something you can change to a value between 0 and 100. Yes, Carl.
So Mick, why is there no GUI option for setting all this stuff?
Why aren't you asking Baz?
Because you're the Citrix.
I know.
Because I would have asked you.
I know. I'm only trying to offload here because I don't have an answer. No. But it would be lovely. And I think we need to see a little bit more functionality in the UI. People probably want to see a little bit more functionality, like Carl is saying in the UI. I think it comes down to performance versus functionality, really, at the end of the day. There is so much you can do in PowerShell that you can't do through the UI. Well, it's about finding the balance, right?
The problem is that someone can go in there and set the stuff, and you can't see it. You don't know it.
Yeah, and there's also another problem, and we've spoken about this as well. The way the SDK is written, if you just viewed delivery groups via the SDK, you will see all the objects, whether they're set to true or false. What you don't know is that even if you set some of those objects to true, some of the functionality still won't even apply. Right. So that's another side of something that we need to probably try and address as well. Yeah. We've spoken about that, and it's true. Yeah, it's especially if you've got many people administering a site, you can run into some issues.
Yeah,
I suppose. But you have the PM's ears just as much as me, Carl. So need to get you on the case, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But no, you raise a good point.
Yeah.
One of the things they'll come back with is you know, they've tried to configure the UI in a way that best suits the type of machines you're dealing with. You know. So that's why you obviously, you know, you don't see any pool management as such when you're dealing with static or server OS machines, stuff like that. That's probably not a great example, but that's on their mind as well. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are things like which have been in Xenter's top 5 which are moved out. Like the reboot behavior, if it's enabled or disabled, you need to get the PowerShell and to look up if reboot is enabled or disabled.
Yeah.
The default practice.
Exactly. Well, another good example is something I'm going to talk about in a minute is the multi-stage power policy rules. And in reality, we're forcing people to go into PowerShell to configure these, whereas we just need to squeeze in another line in the UI, really, if you think about it. So yeah, we take all those points on board, and I'll try and get some answers. We'll try and get some answers and talk about this on our FMA internals blog once we get the co-op up and running.
Yeah, and it's not, well, oh, sorry.
Sorry, this man had a question.
Actually, even if you don't want to implement management in the GUI, which can be a wise decision in the end, you can still implement, how to say, that what the administrators look how to say to see
what has been applied
or it's out. Even if I cannot change it, it will be for administrator to see it.
So like a summary of how it is configured as such.
Sort of an audit log or something.
I can do my own tools or use Splunk or whatever, but actually when I start console, it will be nice to see on the console how the behavior of my system is. If I can change it or not, I must say we all have to go to this automated data center. That means we don't want actually to change the stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But what we really want is to see the stuff.
Yeah, and power management is a good example because there is a lot hidden under the hood inside of PowerShell, more so than probably most features. Yeah,
and it's and we're not saying it's perfect, of course, but it has a lot of capabilities, and it still needs a lot of work, or again, a lot of work.
And maybe this is why it's a bit of a mystery and why we chose the topic. Obviously, you know, everybody has a different level of understanding based on the work you've been doing with power management in terms of FMA. You guys obviously pretty much know what's going on, but
Jim.
Yeah. So I've heard Citrix say a lot about the difference in features between the GUI and PowerShell, and effectively the number that's always banded around is, look, 80% of the use case we should stick in the GUI, if it's 20% then we should add it in PowerShell. I've always felt with the power management features that it's almost the other way around, right? So more, whether it's reporting or whether it's ability to configure, absolutely, you're right, there is so much under the surface of this that it needs to be brought up.
Well, that's really good feedback as well, you know, coupled with what the guys are saying. So I can definitely bring that back to the PMs, you know. Recently the PMs are changing a lot internally in Citrix, but if I still know a few of the PMs.
No, I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, that's usually what happens. But no, we will definitely bring this to the right people and give that feedback, because it's all really valid feedback, you know. Yeah. And it would kind of put us out of a job though, really, Bas, because we wouldn't have any interesting to say.
We'll pick another FMA topic then.
Pick another topic, of course, yeah. Anyway, that's great feedback, so thanks for the...
Yeah. Also by default, with regards to partly managed machines, during peak hours, when a user logs off, the machine will be suspended with, again, PowerShell. You can change this behavior. And of course, we know it's not perfect. No, well, I think we're clear on that.
Too.
Yeah. So, for example, I came across a blog that Helga wrote not too long ago, about 2 years ago. With the statically assigned machines, which are partly manageable, they will get shut down once the off-peak hours apply. But they will only get shut down when there's no active session on the machine, when the machine is in an idle state, which is fine. But if you boot the machine afterwards for maintenance, for virus scanning, patching, or whatever, then nothing happens with regards to power management, because it has already done its work, so to speak. So you have to do it manually, come up with some sort of a scripted way, which Helga did on his blog. So that's something, again, you need to be aware of. Also, combined power management issues. There are some other software products out there who can only who can also, power manage your VM partly, fully, or whatever. And when combined with power management from the FMA, from XenDesktop, then, well, weird things can happen. So if you run into an issue that you can explain one way or the other, Google doesn't help or whatever, so have a look at that. And this is something that Mick already touched on. The no desktops available error can occur when the max power actions per minute, which are the, what did you call them?
The throttling.
Yeah, the throttling, yeah. For example, if you have a large delivery group with a few hundred machines that need to be pre-booted in the morning, then, well, if the max power actions per minute, which is basically XenDesktop telling the underlying hypervisor how many power actions it can execute per minute, well, basically, which is, of course, booting machine is one of them. If you have a large number of machines, it can take, well, a few minutes, and if a large amount of users are trying to log in, they can get this error. So this is something you can change, of course, from within the GUI as you shown, but you, well, of course, you need to be aware of your underlying, well, your storage, your hypervisor, and other things.
And it gets even a little bit more complicated as well, because from a site configuration and scalability point of view, by default, each controller manages a connection to a hypervisor. So it manages that hypervisor connection. So those throttling settings may apply just to a single controller, or may apply to multiple controllers if you assign multiple controllers to manage your hypervisors. So from a whole planning and architect point of view, there's a lot to consider there as well. And again, you use PowerShell to assign hypervisors to individual controllers. So we have lots of hands on this topic, Bas. We start with the man down the back, because his hand was raised first.
Get around with Citrix lifecycle management.
Explain.
So, with lifecycle management, you can have a deployment that constantly monitors your XenDesktop estate.
Okay.
So, effectively, it will pick up on triggers on what's happening here. So, for the maintenance issue, constant monitoring then could shut down stuff you've booted.
Yeah.
And no, it's essentially all the problems you're saying, like it just does it and then leaves it. Yeah. With constant monitoring on top and the PowerShell you're talking about, you could get around this.
Okay, perfect. I don't even, this is quite embarrassing now, but I haven't even heard of Citrix Lifecycle Management. Is this it?
Part of Citrix Workspace Cloud. So it's one of the four things that part of Citrix Workspace Cloud, because you've got
I get you. Yes. Okay. Very good. So that's certainly would help in these type of situations for sure. I think it's Alex, is it?
Yeah. So if we take a look at bullet number 2, shutdown of unused VMs.
Yes.
So there's one exception. If you look at server on dynamic IP addresses, that's actually not a good idea to shut them down for a prolonged period of time, because DHCP has one IP address, your server configuration has another. So again, I don't know specifically if there are any hooks on FMA, but there is really no difference. So if you shut down your servers for prolonged...
So this is a Windows issue as such, which you're...
Yeah, so if you shut down, well, it's Windows and Citrix issue, right?
Yeah.
If you shut down your servers that are on dynamic IP addresses, and you shut them down for a long period of time, meaning when your IPs expire, right? Your farm will think that they still have old IP addresses, while those IP addresses were assigned to somebody else, right? So if IP addresses are not pre-assigned, like you have reservations or you have a static IP address, which is, again, in the PBS environment is actually quite common.
Okay.
Usually there is a tendency to let me shut down the stuff that I'm not using. In fact, we've seen people that will have a bucket of servers A, bucket of servers B. So when I need to change the image, I'll just basically flip it when, the servers and whatever. That creates a really serious problem, the IP address expiration.
Okay.
So for VMs like desktops, not a big deal.
Yeah.
Most likely in the next couple hours, this thing will be up again.
Sure.
But for servers, it's something that you can check.
You have to be careful. But I'm wondering, is he talking about static assigned pool desktops here, like pool static?
Server systems.
He's talking about server systems?
I don't think this applies to server machines. No. It only applies to desktop machines.
Sure.
Because servers are going to power on automatically once they're added to a delivery group, of course.
Okay.
If you have a lot of servers, it probably does make sense also to power manage them.
Sure. Like we do in 6.5, for example.
The reboot cycles and stuff like that, which we'll talk about,
Yeah, but also power and capacity management within 6.5, which isn't here anymore within the new architecture,
Yeah, okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Alex.
Yeah.
So definitely there's some
some
issues.
advanced stuff now.
Yeah, so we can try and move through it pretty quickly. We don't have a huge amount of time left, really. We spoke about, obviously, Baz ran through some of the power management features we have through the UI. And one thing I just wanted to touch really quickly is the multi-stage power policy rules for disconnected behavior. So I've done this before at the last summit I was at as one of our exercises, and it's quite interesting just because it allows you to use PowerShell to do some advanced configuration. Of course, we can see here that if we want to configure a multi-stage power policy rule, the first thing to do is define a standard disconnect policy setting through Citrix Studio. So that's the first thing we need to do. We can just use an example here. Peak hours, we're going to use peak hours, not off-peak hours. When disconnected after 5 minutes, what are we going to do with the machine? And these might not be like real world values, but we're not really concerned about that, okay? It's just showing you the behavior. So when disconnected for 5 minutes, you're going to put an action of suspend on the VM. So these are for statically assigned desktops. Step 2, we have a nice PowerShell image in the background there, very nicely done, Baz. Of course, you've got to dive into PowerShell to have a look at your extended disconnect options, your objects. So we just have an example here, set broker desktop group, the name of your delivery group, training Win8. Okay, so it's a pool static delivery group, and then we specify some values for our peak extended disconnect action and peak extended disconnect timeout. So again, we can see the value here, and if you use PowerShell and just use the select statement to pull back certain values, we can see our values as opposed to a couple of other delivery groups we have here. We have a training 2012 RDS group, a training Win7. We can see peak disconnect action is suspend, peak disconnect timeout is 5 minutes, and then we see our extended values configured as well. So this is a perfect example of something that we probably should be able to put into the UI, because surely it can't take too much work. Again, the 80-20 rule. We can see the extended disconnect action is shut down and the extended disconnect timeout is set to 10 minutes. So pretty simple and straightforward to configure a multi-stage power policy rule. And I think there definitely is, with green IT and conserving resources, I think it's definitely something which people can look at. Observation-wise, what you'll see through Zen Center essentially is after 5 minutes, the Windows 8 VM will suspend, and after another 5 minutes, the Windows 8 VM will shut down, because you've configured your multi-stage power policy rule. So that's quite interesting. Just to note that essentially the extended disconnect power policy action kicks in essentially once the disconnect first happens. So it's not after 15 minutes, it's after 10 minutes essentially where you'll get your extended disconnect action as well. So again, because it's hidden inside a PowerShell, some people may not be aware of it, and we just wanted to talk about it really quickly. I couldn't miss the opportunity to show you some of my holiday snaps from my last vacation. I had my 3D glasses. I forgot them on this trip, which is a shame. So if anybody who follows me on Twitter, XCTipster, you'll obviously know this image right here. And this is something I tweeted a long time ago, and I was looking for some other advanced configurations. You know, when you're configuring your power time schemes, you get to configure, well, by default, you have a drop-down box for weekdays and weekends, of course. Now, you can change that. You don't have the ability through the UI, but through PowerShell, you can change what are considered to be your weekdays and what are considered to be your weekends, for example. So you can create customized power time schemes. So again,
what's the Middle East about weekends?
Well, that's it. That's why you may need to set some custom power time schemes. Over here in Europe, I suppose it's pretty standard, Monday to Friday, right? Although, to be honest with you, if I had my way, weekends would be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right?
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't fly in Citrix. They didn't like that when I brought that to Citrix, you know.
You cannot work Monday to Thursday like 60 hours and then you have Friday.
That would be better. That's more flexibility. Yeah, I like that idea. So yeah, lots of options. Again, some more advanced config through PowerShell. So again, that's just a little bit of fun we wanted to have, throw it up there. There have been some recent improvements, and when I say recent improvements on the SDK side of things, I really mean from Zen Desktop 7 and above. Some of them really aimed at assigned machines because we needed to have a little bit more control over assigned machines. That's, I think, pretty obvious. Automatic power on for assigned during peak was introduced in Zen Desktop 7. Turn on added machine was introduced in Zen Desktop 7. And the settlement period before auto shutdown has only just been introduced in 7.6. So I think we have time. We can push through pretty quickly, Baz.
Yeah.
The idea behind automatic power on for assigned during peak, it's pretty much just complements the automatic power on for assigned, which, you know, brings up assigned machines during peak hours. Okay? Again, behavior that sometimes people are not sure what's going on. They assign themselves to a machine and they don't know why the machine doesn't power on because it's only during peak hours. The problem with that setting is that if somebody accidentally shuts down their machine during peak hours, then the machine is not brought back online, even though it's peak hours. So this value was introduced. Unfortunately, it defaults to false. So if you want to make sure that if somebody shuts down their assigned machine during peak hours, you want to make sure it does come back up, you'll have to set the automatic power on for assigned during peak value to true for that delivery group, basically. So again, just really quickly to let you know about that. And this is supported in ZenSF 5.6 as well through a hotfix. So you can see the value set there by default, desktop kind private. Again, it's applicable to private desktops only, you know, assigned desktops. And we can see the value by default is set to false. So we only have 5 minutes, so I'll push through this really quickly. Turn on added machine essentially is applicable to server shared desktops or RDS workloads. You know, because they are considered shared desktops, if you look at them through PowerShell, there was no way to bring them on automatically during peak hours. So this value is set to true for RDS server workloads when we introduce the server VDA with ZenDesktop 7. So an important command at the same time.
Yeah, well, this is what I was referring to at the beginning of the presentation. Some of the community stuff out there, reboot scripts to well, get over some of the functionality we're missing now within 7.6. So more of a shout out. I'll skip this section. I think we need to know, or I think we know what's missing today.
Getting a lot of abuse.
Sorry?
We're getting a lot of abuse.
Oh yeah. So Sean Ritchie's rolling reboot script. Wilco has a nice one as well. Wilco van Bracht, and of course Dane Young and Eric's from xenoblock.com. I don't know his last name or I can't pronounce it. So. If you give them a Google, they'll pop right up. If you want the exact links, I can send them to you as well. Just know that they're out there, they're free to use, and well, they basically do, or will do anything we need them, or we want them to do. So, yeah, just a short shout out, nothing more than that, and yeah, some things to look forward to, I believe.
Yeah, definitely.
Wasn't the one just added like last week?
Yeah, that's right.
I saw the blog, myself and Baz were talking about that as well.
And there are more, of course.
Yeah, I think we probably have a note of that in the slides as well. So I've been talking to William Charnell internally in Citrix. I asked him before we did this session, I said, what's coming down the line with, you know William, I'm sure, Carl. Some of the people here might know William Charnell as well. He's one of our architects. I see a few people nodding their heads. But of course, everybody's under NDA here, but not that it's a huge deal. But there are some shortfalls and limitations to the way we manage server operating machines, and we're aware of that in terms of the reboot cycles and reboot schedules. So there isn't a huge amount of flexibility. When you configure these reboot cycles, they're applied to all machines inside of your delivery group. So there's not enough flexibility and granular control. So long term, they've no estimated release date as such, but they are looking at adding more control and flexibility here and allowing people to apply reboot cycles, which are defined through the reboot schedule in the UI. We're going to be able to apply those reboot cycles to groups of machines inside of a delivery group. So that's something which is coming down the line. That's really one of the only things really kind of relevant to what we're talking about today, so we said we would just look at it really quickly. As it is of today, it's a little bit misleading. I'm sure some of you guys look at the reboot schedule property inside of a server OS delivery group and you're seeing this term group, first group and restart additional groups, and it's certainly a little bit confusing. It doesn't mean, you know, different delivery groups. Essentially what happens right now is, you know, we spread the reboots or the restarts evenly across two pretty much halves, basically. And the restart first group essentially means restart the first server. It doesn't really mean group, it really means restart the first server. And then every server is subsequently restarted at a 5-minute period. And that's pretty much basically what happens today. So we definitely need to get a little bit more granular and give people more control over that, that's for sure. So again, one thing that we did notice, because we were testing that UI, and again, this is diving into PowerShell and wondering, well, the option is there, I wonder will it work for a different desktop type? So we looked at the reboot schedules for a shared desktop OS delivery group, and hey presto, it works as well. So we were able to define a reboot schedule and cycle for a desktop group, and it worked perfectly as well. So again, if you wanted to try that, again, an example of something that's not through the UI, specifically aimed at server, OS delivery groups, but also works with desktop delivery groups.
Yeah,
as
VDI as well, and it isn't documented anywhere. So.
It's not documented,
Yeah.
exactly, so we just tested. That's up to Carl. Carl.
Most things.
Well, yeah.
So I think we have a minute or two left maybe?
No, exactly 45 minutes now, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we're just on to our questions, really.
If any.
So don't be shy, but you guys haven't been shy so far anyway, so.
That's his first time.
Yeah, big round of applause to Baz, right?
Thank you.
There is still all the place for improvement, isn't it?
More so with me, I think.
What did he say?
Still a lot of room for improvement.
Oh, sure, yeah. Of course, always.
I swear Baz was Irish, how fast he speaks. People always tell me to slow down, you speak too fast.
I was about to ask if Bas wants to join the legendary Andrew Morgan and Sean Bass.
Oh, sure, yeah. We'll give it a try.
So anyway,
I think that's it then.
Yeah, so thanks very much for being here and listening to us waffle on about a small but what we consider an important side of FMA.
Yeah.
And again, look forward to the FMA Internals Co-op. You know, we're really going to start getting going on that.
We're going to go.
Be visible, and we'll take, if people have topics that they want us to dig into, you know, the Citrix guy on the inside, the well-known industry guy, so we will take, you know, recommendations. If there's an area you want us to focus on, we'll take it on board and we'll dig into it, right, Baz? And
of course.
We'll get it out there for the community, and that's really part of what we want to do with this as well.
Okay.
So thanks very much.
Thank you.